Alrighty, hello class, and welcome back to Let's Make Music, the music educational channel where we bring music lessons to you from home. Once again, I'm your instructor, Cody Hanna. I'm a multi-instrumentalist of about 15 years now, and I'm working on my bachelor's degree in music education. So, lesson 3 of our basic music theory series, we're going to be talking all about intervals today. So we're going to learn what an interval is. We're going to learn how we label the basic intervals. We're going to learn the different kinds of intervals. We're going to learn about interval inversions and harmonic intervals and consonant and dissonant intervals. So first, what is an interval? An interval in music is the distance in pitch between two notes. So if they occur at the same time, you'll see them in the music one on top of the other. That interval is going to be called a harmonic interval because the two notes are harmonizing with each other. If the tones occur separately, that is one after the other, that interval is going to be called a melodic interval. And here you can see some examples. So on the left here we have our harmonic interval, and you can see that they're stacked right on top of each other. And then over here is our melodic interval, and they occur at separate times. So how do we label intervals? When we label intervals in music, we basically go off of two things: an interval's size and an interval's quality. Interval size is equal to the number of steps between the two tones, including the original tone. So if we wanted to look at the interval from C to E, what we would do is we'd start at C, so that's 1, C to D, that's 2, D to E, that's 3. So we would call that interval a third. And for right now, when you're determining the size of an interval, ignore any sharps or flats. We're just going purely by steps and by letter names. So make sure you count that original step, but you can go C, D, E is 1, 2, 3, a third. And yeah, they're just, intervals are named with ordinal numbers, which basically just means that if it's 2 steps, it'll be a second. If it's 3 steps, it'll be a third. If it's 5 steps, it'll be a fifth, and etc., etc. So simple and compound intervals. A simple interval is an interval that is within the span of an octave. So anything an octave or smaller is going to be what we refer to as a simple interval. A compound interval is an interval that is larger than an octave. So anything outside of that first octave span of notes is going to be a compound interval. And we identify those intervals the same as we do simple intervals, by the number of steps. The thing about compound intervals is sometimes the math can fool you if you do it the wrong way. So here's an example of what I'm talking about. So here in this diagram here, we have an octave. So C to C right there would be an octave, and then up to G for a fifth. So we have an octave plus a fifth. And in a lot of people's minds, in my mind for a long time, I thought of this as, okay, just 8 plus 5. But that gives you 13, and that is not what this interval is. You always have to go by the number of steps, and don't just try to add like 8 as an octave plus whatever other interval you want to get, because it'll give you the wrong answer. So just be careful with compound intervals. Always make sure that you're going by steps and not just trying to add 8 plus whatever together. So, interval qualities. See, we're trying to bring you some quality content. We have 4 basic qualities that we can apply to our intervals. There are major qualities, minor quality, augmented quality, and diminished quality. So each of those kinds of intervals has slightly different rules. So our most simple intervals are going to be either major or minor. And major keys are a little bit larger, minor keys are a little bit smaller. If you wanted to check a major or minor interval, what you could do is, let's take the third, for example, because we were working with that just a second ago. So C to E. C natural to E natural would be a major third. And we know that because the note E natural is the third note of the C major scale, right? So we could check it that way. If we wanted to make it a minor third, what we have to do is flat that E to an E flat. So C to E flat is only 2.5 steps. So that would make it a minor interval instead of a major interval. And we can check that again. We know that E flat is the third note of the C natural minor scale. If we add a half step to a major interval, making it larger by 1/2 step, that's what we would call augmented. That would be an augmented interval. And the same is true for the reverse. If we do a minor interval that's smaller and we reduce it even more by a half step, it becomes diminished. And this is just some examples of interval qualities. We have C and E, that would be a major third, minor third, C and E flat, augmented third, C and E sharp, and diminished third, C and E double flat. We also have some intervals that are neither major or minor, and we call those intervals perfect intervals. So our perfect intervals are going to be our unisons. That's when the two tones that are being compared in an interval are the same tone. We have fourths that are perfect, fifths that are perfect, and octaves are perfect. And just drill it into your head now that these will never be major or minor. They are perfect intervals. And this here, you can just see we have our unison here, two C's, perfect fourth, C and F, perfect fifth, C and G, and then the octave C, and then a C an octave above. So what we can do with intervals is we can invert intervals. And let me start out by saying this. So if you broke up an octave into two intervals, both of those intervals would invert to create the other. So let's say I broke up an octave into a sixth and a third. What we would get is either a major sixth and a minor third, or a minor sixth and a major third. Basically, when we invert an interval, what we're doing is shifting the lower note up an octave or the upper note down an octave. We're just flipping it on its head, basically. And so when we have a pair of interval inversions, they both should add up to 9. So you'll see sixes are always inverted into thirds. Fifths are always inverted into fourths, and et cetera, et cetera. When we invert a major interval, we have to turn it into minor. So if you invert that major sixth that we were talking about, it turns it into a minor third. But really, the two notes that you're comparing are the same note names, but they're just flipped, so they're different pitches. And then the same is true for augmented and diminished intervals that we invert. So if you invert an augmented interval, it becomes diminished, and vice versa. So we also have enharmonic intervals, and these are intervals that are different sizes, but they share the same number of half steps and whole steps, right? Basically, it just means that they sound the same but have different names depending on the context. So we talked a little bit about tonality and how the different scale degrees sort of function within the scale. That becomes more apparent with intervals. Basically, music is a story of push and pull, of tension and release, and of consonance and dissonance, like we can see here. So when we have a consonant interval, that interval is going to sound more stable and pleasing to our ears, and tends to be a source of resolution in music. When we have dissonant intervals, they tend to be sources of tension. They're unstable. They lead our ears into wanting the resolution and the stability of consonant intervals. So our consonant intervals are going to be our unisons, thirds, fifths, sixths, and octaves. These are just intervals that are tend to be a little bit more pleasing to the Western ear. Our dissonant intervals are going to be seconds, sevenths, and any augmented or diminished intervals. They just have an unstable sound that tends to want to go somewhere. It wants to resolve back to a consonant interval. The only weirdo of the bunch is the perfect fourth because it can be either consonant or dissonant depending on context. And we can further break down our consonant intervals into perfect and imperfect consonants. So, you know, your unison, your fourth, your fifth, and your octave are going to be your perfect consonants, and your thirds and your sixths are going to be your imperfect consonants. And that wraps up our lesson on intervals. Great work. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more music lessons like this. Until next time, keep learning, keep practicing, and let's make music. Have a good one.